The UK's High Court has granted the US government limited permission to appeal a decision that denied the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The news comes a week after reports that a lead witness in the case admitted to lying so he could secure immunity from the DOJ.
Assange's fiancée, Stella Morris, gave a statement outside the High Court in London yesterday and called on the Biden administration to drop the case.
If the Biden administration is serious about respecting the rule of law, the First Amendment, and of defending global press freedom, the only thing it can do is drop this case. This case is the most vicious attack on global press freedom in history. The US government is accusing a foreign journalist, a foreign publisher who was outside the United States for publishing true information that incriminated the US military of committing war crimes. Julian is a freedom fighter. He fights for freedom from torture, freedom from illegal wars, freedom from surveillance and manipulation. And that is what the US government is criminalizing.
Host of the Katie Halper Show and co-host of Useful Idiots, Katie Halper, joins us to discuss. Now, Katie, the United States in its appeal essentially made two arguments. The first argument they made is that the judge gave too much weight to a particular psychiatrist. That was rejected. The second argument they made is that they promised basically that they will not torture him. Here is how they phrased that to the High Court. The United States will not impose special administrative measures, that's basically torture, isolation, on Mr. Assange pre-trial or post-conviction. This undertaking is subject to the condition that the United States retains the power to impose SAMs on Mr. Assange in the event that, after entry of this assurance, he was to commit any future act that met the test for the imposition of a SAM. So, in other words, as a baseline, they will not torture him, but if they decide to torture him in the future, they will. Also interesting that they did not introduce these assurances during the actual trial itself, when this was a major issue of contention. So, Katie, what was your reaction to this news?
Well, I mean, I think it's so sordid and disturbing on a number of levels, right? So first, we have, as you just mentioned, I mean, they have no standing, right? They could have made all of these arguments during the actual case, and they're just desperate. And I really want to just kind of address people watching this show who consider themselves like opponents of Trump and Trumpism, and who support Biden or support the Democrats, okay? If that's okay for me to just make a special pitch. Like, we know there are two issues. One is a principled issue of freedom of press, and we'll get to that in a second. But I'm really talking to you guys out there, okay? You guys who hate Trump and you love Obama and you love Biden, and you're really excited, right? Because Biden is in and America has returned to being the leader of democracy. I'm like about to throw up in my mouth. The leader of democracy, human rights, let freedom ring, rule of law, right? We're no longer these bullies. We're no longer breaking the law left and right, right? Okay, so if that's true, then you really want the Biden administration to be on the right side of history, right? Remember, Obama dropped this. He decided not to pursue Assange. Who wanted to go after Assange? Trump and Pompeo. So you want to ask yourself why you'd be siding with Trump and Pompeo. You shouldn't be siding with Trump and Pompeo. You should be siding with the rule of law and freedom of press and actually defending free press and the First Amendment. And you should also be wondering why you are going after, or why the United States would ever go after someone for publishing something, right, that the New York Times published. So again, if you care about free press, if you think that the New York Times should be free to publish what it published, which included things from WikiLeaks, you can't really expect Assange to go to jail for that. So that's one issue. The other issue is, as you pointed out, I mean, it's really pretty disgusting and disturbing that the United States is basically saying, okay, without our intervention, he'd probably be tortured. We're going to promise that as a baseline, by default, he won't be tortured. But he could be tortured. We're not taking that off the table. But this whole thing is ridiculous because, as you guys have covered, we now know that the star witness about the hacking, the alleged hacking that Assange engaged in, admitted that he lied. in exchange for immunity from the FBI. This guy's also happens to be a pedophile, was diagnosed as a sociopath or a psychopath. I can't remember which of the two. But this is an embarrassment. Like, this is a total embarrassment, and people will look back on this as a dark chapter in American history if Assange is allowed to die behind bars for fighting for freedom and a free press. And I want to say one thing, because I know a lot of people are angry at him. They consider him responsible for for Trump's 2016 election. Nothing he's being accused of has anything to do with that. Nothing. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in this case that's related to that. He's not being gone after, prosecuted, extradited for anything that he did in 2016. And again, the hacking that they're accusing him of didn't happen, which relates to Iceland. Like, no one even cares about that. They're just bringing that up to justify extraditing him. And again, if the United States wants to be the leader of the free world and wants to set an example that, we are now back to business as usual and we return to normal and we're to fight, okay. I think I've made my case to people who believe in that stuff, which I don't. But I think it's an important thing to look at. Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So Katie's making this really important point about how the Obama administration dropped its sort of pursuit of Assange because it couldn't get around what Ryan has reminded us. It was called the New York Times problem. And right. So if you have that New York Times problem, and now as Katie's addressing sort of directly the champions of Joe Biden and the champions of democracy who purport to care so deeply about freedom of the press, this case is so thin, and that's why we keep seeing it fall apart. Stella tweeted that reports about U.S. undertakings are grossly misleading. On any given day, 80,000 prisoners in U.S. prisons are held in solidarity. Only a handful are in ADX under special administrative measures. The U.S. government also says it may change its mind if CIA says so once Assange is in U.S. custody. That's what Ryan was just describing earlier, and we saw it actually from the document itself. Katie, what I want to ask you is why this landed with basically a thud in the legacy media over the course of the last few days. We've been covering this here really closely. We're probably one of the only outlets that's covered it this closely on a daily basis. But why do you think it is that in the press, even right now, as they sort of purport to be so excited to have a leader, a president, who finally respects them once again, even though sometimes he jokingly decides to joke about hitting them with a car, they're so excited to finally have Joe Biden in office. Why is it that they are not following this story closely? It's not just about them not focusing on it, because they never even do that, but they're not even following it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a total miscarriage. I mean, it's malpractice, right? It's indefensible. Regardless of your feelings on Assange, this is newsworthy, right? This is a huge case. This is a historic case. It is a case that free press is basically resting on. And you barely have anyone covering the fact that the entire case is based on the testimony that we now know was false, right? We know this guy, Ziggy Thordarson, lied about the alleged hacking. That in itself should be on headlines across the news, across the spectrum. This story now, the fact that the United States is saying, well, we won't start out torturing him, but we may torture him. This also should be headline news, front on the cover of all legacy newspapers, all legacy media. Every channel, every newspaper should be concerned with this. And it's really scary that they're not, because they could be next. I mean, I think I've talked about this before, that in some ways maybe they know that they won't be next under a Biden administration, but why not? You never know what's going to happen. And again, if they had any commitment, these are people who claim to care about free press. This is their business. This is their bread and butter. Well, that's probably why it's their bread and butter, and they have access. They don't want to go after. If they actually spoke truth to power at all, they'd have to be reporting on this. And that would actually make the Biden administration respond to this. But they can't, and they don't want to, because either they have this pathological hatred of Assange that is much more important than their rational thinking or their cognitive skills, or they're afraid to go after it because they don't want to lose access to Biden. Or they're just cowards in general. But the idea that we have a free press, I mean, this to me is such a great example of how we may technically in some cases have a free press, although not really, as we now know from the persecution and prosecution of Assange. Like, literally, you can be behind bars, which he still is. We shouldn't forget that. He could die any minute now because of the conditions in the jail he's currently in, where someone just recently committed suicide. But not only that, but what kind of media freedom is there where where journalists, I guess they're free to act like a bunch of cowards and a bunch of sheep who don't ever do anything independent. I mean, this is really infuriating. I think like what's hard is that when the media doesn't report on something, obviously we don't even know about it as a story. But that's why, shows that do talk about it are so important, because it's a meta story. It's not just about what's happening with Assange. It's about the media's complicity and their silence about it, which, again, these people should be up in arms about it, even in self-interest. How are they not afraid of this?
And even I was going to say just a super quick follow-up point. Katie says, to the left who purports to care about these things, here's why, if you're worried that the WikiLeaks 2016 election stuff, that's totally separate. And I would say the same to the right. If you're worried about the potential consequences of what Assange released back, a decade ago, this is also separate from that, because it's about the case. It's the substance of the case itself that should be aggravating.
Yeah. And we'll keep watching this for sure. And Katie Halper.
And one thing, one thing quickly. Emily, thank you. You got the right. You covered the right? Because that's important to tell them too. And
the
right's
been okay on this, right? But
I think it's important to remember that I'm going to talk again to the resistance libs, looking right at you, that Assange also, WikiLeaks published stuff that exposed the Bush administration. Don't forget that. Also, this is really important. Assange allegedly was offered a deal to cooperate with Trump and name his sources, right? And he said no. Right, Diana Roebuck apparently went to the embassy and offered him a deal.
Although there's some question over whether that's actually accurate. Although Assange did make that claim, it's not entirely clear that's true. But also, don't forget the resistance liberals love Bush now, so maybe that isn't going to work anymore.
Maybe. So here's what I will say. There's a tweet he had. WikiLeaks has tweeted against Trump draining the swamp, which he obviously didn't do, and they pointed that out. They also warned the State Department when something was going to be published. There's audio of that, when he called Hillary's State Department. So he's not a careless brute of a man at all. And also, you guys, his kids were spied on. Their diapers were taken in to be tested to see if they were his kids.
It's foul.
It's disgusting. Yeah. Everyone should be up in arms across the spectrum. And the New York Times, I'm looking at you. You should be ashamed and do the right thing and stop reporting on this in a way that's cowardly and just acts as a stenographer of the State Department. You should be ashamed, and you're siding with the legacy of, you're doing Pompeo and Trump's bidding now. That's what I'm sliding.
Katie, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
We have more Rising for you coming up right after this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a video.